Imagine a mother, alone, sleepless, with a small fire at her feet. For weeks under the open sun, she guards the exposed, unburied bodies of her sons from birds and jackals. Her vigil is wordless, but it is impossible to ignore. Her refusal to let the shame of an unburied death go unchallenged becomes the clearest moral indictment against a king. This is Rizpah, a woman whose quiet grief forced a nation to reckon with its guilt, led a king to act, and whose story still haunts and teaches us today. To understand Rizpah's story, you have to see the larger political storm. Years after King Saul's fall and King David's uneasy consolidation of power, the nation of Israel was struck by a severe famine. The biblical narrative ties that famine to blood guilt on the house of Saul. A wrong had been done to the Gibeonites, a people with whom Israel had a treaty, and Saul's regime had violated it. To end the famine, Israel's leaders sought to make amends. The result was grim. 7 male descendants of Saul were handed over to the Gibeonites and executed. Among those killed were 2 of Rizpah's sons, Armoni and Mephibosheth. Their bodies were displayed, hanged on a hill before the Lord, and left exposed, a sign of both punishment and public shame. And this is the moment the story tightens into heartbreak. Rizpah, one of Saul's concubines, does something no one else will do. She takes up watch. The Hebrew account describes her sitting on a rock, keeping guard, preventing birds and wild beasts from desecrating the corpses of her sons. Her vigil lasts from the beginning of the harvest until the heavy rains finally come, weeks, perhaps even months, through the scorching heat of the day and the cold of the night. It is an act of astonishing, heartbreaking persistence. She becomes both mourner and witness, refusing anonymity for her children even in death. Why is this so powerful? Well, in ancient Israel, a proper burial was not just a social courtesy. It was a religious and existential necessity. To leave a body unburied was to condemn it to dishonor and, in the ancient imagination, to jeopardize that person's place among the ancestors. Rizpah's watch, therefore, isn't only an act of maternal love, it's a profound protest against spiritual abandonment. Rizpah's lonely resistance did something subtle and profound. It pierced the conscience of the court and the people. The biblical narrator tells us that King David was moved and perhaps shamed by her action. He then took the remains of Saul and his son Jonathan from where they had been buried and gave them an honorable interment in the family tomb. He also collected the bones of the 7 men who had been executed and buried them all together with the proper rites. And only after this ritual burial did the famine finally lift. That sequence of events, Rizpah's watch, David's retrieval and burial of the bones, and the end of the famine, links private grief directly to public repentance. The text implies that it was the moral pressure of Rizpah's vigil that compelled the king to correct the injustice and bring closure to a wound that had festered in the nation for far too long. So let's be clear about the mechanics of this tragedy. The Gibeonites were a people spared by Israel centuries earlier through a treaty. But under Saul's reign, some wrongdoing occurred that left them deeply aggrieved. When the famine struck, Israel's leaders asked the Gibeonites what it would take to appease them. Their demand was severe: 7 of Saul's descendants. David, trying to remove the people's guilt and end the famine, handed the men over. They were executed publicly and left unburied, an act meant to symbolize the curse that had come upon Saul's house. This has a grim legal and religious logic behind it. In the Old Testament, being hanged or exposed signified being under a curse. So the executions were meant to transfer blame away from the land and restore God's favor. But they were also, from another angle, a summary punishment that sacrificed individual lives for a political settlement. And here we find the deeper, lasting lesson of Rizpah's story. Her act is a form of moral pressure that needs no speeches, no swords, just stubborn human presence. Commentators from across traditions have seen her as a model of sacrificial resistance. Modern interpreters see Rizpah as someone who moves into the burning sun under the crosses, drawing public attention away from the centers of power and toward the margins of suffering. Her watch unmasks the terrible bargain that political expediency sometimes makes with justice. What the king and the court had tried to settle with a cold, calculated ritual, a mother unsettled with raw, undeniable grief. Her vigil is a prophetic, nonverbal indictment. Theologically, the story forces us to question the relationship between ritual atonement and true human justice. The burial finally given to Saul's house after Rizpah's watch suggests that true restoration requires both ritual closure and moral repair. Rizpah forces the nation to move from legalistic solutions to acts of human compassion and honor. So why does this ancient vignette matter in our age? Because Rizpah's story isn't just about ancient law. It's about what grief can do in a world that often prefers quiet complicity. Her vigil is a model for moral witness. One person's refusal to accept indignity can force institutions to act. It shows the power of maternal love as a form of public ethics, where caregiving becomes protest. And it highlights the need for both public ritual and private responsibility to heal our communal wounds. In modern terms, think of the mothers who stand for justice at sites of state violence, the family members who refuse to let disappearances be forgotten, or the single witness who keeps vigil until the world finally pays attention. Rizpah is a template for civic courage and sustained, patient activism. Rizpah did not speak loudly, she did not lead armies, and she did not draw crowds, yet her presence was louder than any royal edict. The king acted, the bones were buried, the famine eased. But more importantly, the moral record was corrected, and a nameless concubine's grief became a nation's mirror. If this story moved you, if Rizpah's quiet courage lit something inside you, do the simplest things that keep stories like hers alive. Like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to our channel for more deep dives into the texts that shape us. Hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next story.